Yeah.
Hello! Oh, they almost caught us in the green room because I went on air while we were still talking. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Game Audio Hour number 82. It's our weekly podcast. We discuss all things game audio, from creative ideas to the latest techniques, project experiences, to audio secrets. Here's where you'll find your in-depth coverage and opinions related to game audio. Vince, welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back. Had a nice little 1-week vacation in Japan, but oh man, I'm back in America, and there's a lot of things that I really like about this place too. Like In-N-Out Burger. You know, you're a SoCal guy, so you can appreciate that.
Yeah, I had In-N-Out this weekend. You can't turn that thing down.
Oh yeah.
Did you get to see Alex? Alex, did you see Vince?
I certainly did. And you know what? It was the same when I met Vince here last year. There is nobody more inspiring than Vincent Diamante. You meet Vince, and then like after I said goodbye to Vince, like, yeah, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and Vince inspired me to do this, and I'm going to do this, and now that's like 1 week out of meeting with Vince, it's like back to the real world. It's like, oh, I can't do any of that. That's Vince has that effect on you. You just sort of get inspired about game audio, and we're talking about. We had a fantastic day. We spent the whole day together. We walked all over the city. We looked at 4 synth shops, 2 that were closed, unfortunately, and 2 that were open but didn't really have anything interesting. But it was great fun anyway. Then, well, we'll talk about more of what we did a little later, I guess. But we also had a little a very, very nice dinner with the one and the only Manami Matsumae, who of course is the legendary Japanese game audio composer, responsible for such notable titles as Mega Man and UN Squadron and many, many others.
That's great that she was available.
Yeah, she's really nice.
That's a good way to put it. And Vince, so your travels there were safe. Your flight was good.
Oh yeah, it was pretty great.
You procured new glasses.
Yeah, I got some fancy Japanese glasses from Kaneko Optical, and with a glass made by Nikon, the famed camera optics company. Yeah, nice little upgrade to me. Who knows what will happen 10 years from now? I'm looking forward to Bionic Vince eventually, but this is a nice stepping stone.
Nice. Well, hey, let's start with the first topic. Alex and you guys Vince, were talking about sound cards, I think, last show a little bit.
Yeah, actually, this was a question that I wanted to ask Vince a few weeks ago, and not only is it a question for myself, because it's something I've never properly understood, it's also a very, very valid question for people who are interested in getting into any kind of audio production, or people who are at that stage with their gear where they're looking to take it to the next level. So the question is, when you pay more money for an audio interface, what do you get beyond the things that are really obvious, like extra inputs, extra outputs, higher sampling rates and all that, the obvious stuff? What do you get beyond that? And the case in point is I think there's a Roland interface. They have their regular Roland capture series, which is very affordable, and then they've got this one sort of boutique kind of thing with this massive gain knob on it, and it costs like 3 times as much. And you can look at the numbers on the box and think, yeah, well, that's all really good, but I mainly work in the box, and I don't need that many recording inputs, and I'm not really using it as a preamp or whatever. So, what am I getting by paying 3 times as much? So I asked Vince this question when we were in Japan together, looking at this box with this huge gain knob. I said, well, Vince, what do I gain by getting this? And naturally, of course, Vince grabs the low-hanging fruit and says, well, there's this huge gain knob right here. Low-hanging fruit. Vince, low-hanging fruit.
I am known to make really, really dumb jokes here, but that happens when I'm around a master like Kyle. But seriously, with sound cards, it's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it. There's the hardware capability, there's the software, there's the circuitry, there is the support system that is in place. And I've been, I don't know lucky is the right word, but I have had the fortune of experiencing lots of sound cards through a pretty wide spectrum, from $100 sound cards to $1,500 sound cards. And the companies can provide all sorts of different support. And I think that's one of the first things to realize. The hardware is super obvious, but something that a lot of people don't realize is the quality of the software. Just recently, I actually made my most expensive hardware purchase, which was my most expensive audio interface purchase, which is an RME Fireface, and that's about $1,300 there. And that got me a lot of things. It got me a whole lot of hardware capability. It also got me software, and the software capability is really quite nice. You not only have ins and outs into the system, but the software allows you to do things with an FPGA chip inside the box. So that's actually another piece of hardware there. But the software allows me to do all sorts of internal routing of the mixer inside that hardware box. And once it's in there, I can do other things to it. I can use internal reverbs, internal EQs on it. Prior to using this audio interface, I was actually using a separate piece of software to do EQ correction for my room. And that would be running through another piece of software in my computer. Now I actually have that happening in the box, and I now have a little bit lighter, a little bit less latency before the audio comes and hits me in the ears from my speakers. So that's really cool. Being able to do separate dynamics on all those inputs and outputs, that's really cool. That combination of that little bit of extra hardware beyond just inputs and outputs in the box, as well as this really nicely designed software. But it's not just the software capability, it's also the support system for that software. So RME's drivers have been around for a while, and they go back, way back, to supporting not just audio interfaces from today, but also audio interfaces from the early 2000s even. Those things still work with the modern developments from RME's software team, which is great. The idea that you have an audio box that could last you a decade is pretty cool. I actually had an audio interface that was made by Emu, which is the parent company of Creative Labs and Sound Blaster. And that Emu interface that I had back in the mid-2000s was a really nice bit of hardware. It was also a really nice bit of software, but the support system for that hardware by their driver teams was like, I guess it will work, kind of. And as soon as my audio interface hit about 2 years old, they really didn't care about me whatsoever. They just moved on to the next audio interfaces, because no one was buying PCI card audio interfaces in the particular market that they were targeting. They wanted to support the USBs. They wanted to support all this new hardware. So Emu didn't have a really good experience with that. It did provide that nice bang for the buck for the hardware inputs and outputs that was really going for. But so it's a combination of hardware, software, and the actual driver team support for that hardware and software going down the line, which is really important. And that's hard to tell what exactly you're getting there until you look back at the history of that development team. Yeah.
One thing I look for in a high-end...
That I have.
Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, this question is kind of relevant not only to myself, but I imagine to a fair amount of people in game audio as well. But when is the time that you should be thinking about upgrading your audio interface? So let's say you have been doing this for maybe a year or two now. You've got several game projects under your belt. Everything's fine. Everything about your setup is fine. You don't feel any limitation. I need more inputs, or I've just bought this synth with 8 outs and I need to put into something or whatever. You're perfectly happy. You're getting sort of perfectly decent results. nobody has said, your sounds aren't sounding so good there. It must be your audio interface. So everything's just fine, and you're doing all of this on a, maybe I guess you call it low to mid-range affordable audio interface, such as the one that I have, because I have the Eddie-Roll FA66 Firewire interface. So a really basic Firewire interface with 2 inputs, 2 outputs, and actually more than 2 inputs. But anyway, the question then is, like, when is a good time to think about upgrading your interface, considering that it seems that it depends on what else is happening in your setup. If nothing is changing, or you're just sort of, is it?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Yeah, is it feasible to just keep on using the same thing, or do you gain that much by taking a step up with the interface, assuming that the rest of your setup isn't changing that drastically? What do you think?
If everything is fine, like if nobody's complaining about sound, if you feel comfortable with the interface, then keep going. But I would future-proof it. I would keep track of what's going on in the industry. Like if people are starting to really go crazy for 96 or 192 or something, and you've got an interface that's 48, then you're going to want to start following the trends and making sure that you're ready for that upgrade. When it comes to an audio interface, for me, like Vince said, it's got to have a bunch of features, ins and outs. I don't necessarily need MIDI because I use a MIDI timepiece, Moog MTP-AV, but I do want the pre's to sound really good. I want the noise floor to be really low. I want it to reach 192. If you take your interface and you turn your volume up all the way and you hear a bunch of hiss, you're actually, let me reword that. You're probably going to hear hiss out of most interfaces when you turn your volume up all the way. That's the noise floor. It depends on how far you turn it before you start hearing the hiss. That's the problem. If you're halfway up its volume and you're hearing hiss, that's not a very good audio interface. It doesn't have, it's got a really high noise floor. But so that's one thing I do with audio interfaces, is crank up the volume without anything going through them and see if I can hear hiss. And then the next thing is, it's almost more reputation, isn't it, than it is scientific fact anymore that mic pre's are good and bad. A lot of people will automatically go to some Neve mic pre's or something, which you're going to get from Focusrite stuff. And some people will just be fine with the mic pre's on the back. I'm fine with the mic pre's on my 2408 by Moog. I love it. I also use an Apogee Symphony, and I honestly don't hear a difference between the two interfaces that I go between. So it's really tricky nowadays, because I think manufacturers have done a much better job of doing of creating audio interfaces. There certainly was a day where that made a difference, but I don't know if that exists very much anymore, especially now that the channel strip is really out of the mix. In the old days, your mic pre was on, say, a big board, and it was running also past an EQ, maybe some compression, and that whole system created a sound that was like a TOF sound for Tridents, or it was a Neve sound, or it was an SSL sound. And there was a huge difference, and those boards colored the sound, and they sound the way they do, and those boards, still today, companies are still making those boards. But for people who are in the box and are getting an interface, I think the number one thing you want to look for is future-proofing it to make sure that you've got that you can get up to 192. You get the bit depth you need. It's got a low noise floor. You crank up the volume and see how much hiss is there. That's and it's got pre's that you like. I mean, certainly I've heard pre's out of really cheap things. I won't say their name out loud, but it rhymes with M Audio. So I've heard some really bad mic pre's, and frankly, the Digidesign 003 has some really kind of shaky mic pre's to my ear. But I bet you there are people out there who love, the 003 mic pre's, and they don't mind them. So personal preference in that regard, I think.
Well, I'm just a few guys in the in our chat room have got some really good opinions. We've got let's just scroll up a bit. So of course. The magnanimous Matt Miller has chimed in by saying that when you outgrow the sound quality, you need more inputs, or it's no longer supported by your operating system. That's the time to upgrade.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, if
Yeah.
you can't get drivers anymore, you can't get. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan Reynolds has got another great point here, which is actually relevant to me. He said also, if you lose balance when you're adjusting gain, cheap interfaces will have the problem. So that means if you're adjusting gain, I think, Dan, if this is what you're meaning, that the stereo image is changing when you adjust the gain. Like, I've noticed that on my interface. If I go down really, really low, it actually biases to one side.
I've never noticed that. That's a very interesting thing.
At a sort of very nominal monitoring volume, you don't notice it. But when you're adjusting the volume, I will notice that the stereo image changes very slightly. Yeah, Dan has mentioned that's actually a good point. One thing that one of the question that I have is, sorry, I mean this is just entirely selfishly my own situation. But if I'm maybe it's relevant to other people too. But if I'm rarely ever recording anything through my interface, so the pre's don't matter that much. As mostly in the box synthesizer, I'd love to have racks of real synths here, but I just don't have the space because hey, it's Japan. Is there any benefit to a better, more expensive interface? And Matt Ullman has said no. What other people say? As long as your monitoring is faithful, 100%, it wouldn't worry too much. Yeah, well, this is all really good, good advice. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I'm catching up here.
Yeah, I'm just going to quietly sit here and read this.
Yeah, I think the best ability is just availability. Like I decided to switch because I was in this position where I didn't need to use my audio interface to its fullest. I could just okay, I'll do some in the box stuff. I know I'm going to be doing a whole lot of coding over the next 2 weeks as opposed to doing a whole lot of audio recording. So I'm like, okay, cool. But if things work, and it's surprising that I don't see this as much in the audio production world, but in the video production world, everyone is actually paranoid about, wow, you have a working setup, you just have a pot of gold there to have a working setup. That perfect relationship between your audio interface, your FireWire chipset, your mainboard chipset, your OS setup. You see this all the time in video forums where, oh, this is a setup that absolutely actually works. And I think that a whole lot of audio guys would probably would benefit them to think similarly. Yeah, audio cards have gotten really good. There are more things that you can do with them, like, oh, this one has more boutique preamps and whatnot. But if you have an audio setup that works, you are really quite a lucky fellow there.
I agree with that completely, Vince, because I have my Mac Pro is an early 2009, and I bought an identical Mac Pro, the same everything, because this thing runs like it's just fantastic. I don't have any lag issues. I don't have any old issues. There was a time at which OS 10, I think it was, what was after Mountain Lion? Was it Snow Leopard or something?
I think it was Hairy Goat.
It was the other way around.
Is that what it was? Well, one of them, maybe it was Mountain Lion, was causing.
The alpaca?
It caused me some issues. But as I've upgraded through, it's been great. Although I'm not on El Capitan, I don't really want to be right now. I wait until the last minute for those things. But hey, man, you don't have to go out and buy the latest machine. But what I did do to this Mac Pro that I love so much, and there's no solid-state drives in it either, is I cranked up the memory, and I do everything through FireWire 800 that I can if I have an external hard drive. And so my Drobo is 800, and the memory's maxed out. I've got a crap load of hard drives in it. This thing runs fantastic. So I have an exact duplicate of it that I can just switch to if something happens. And I couldn't be happier.
Cool.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention one thing really quickly before we move on. Matt M. said in the chat room about the importance of digital to audio, or digital to analog, analog to digital converters. That is extremely important, though. Whoever makes whichever one you like, I'm not going to say there's a particular DA that I like this audio interface's DA is better than that audio interface. And you can get DAs all by themselves, too, which are decoupled from your audio interface. But whoever's doing that math the best is very important, because if you don't get that, you're going to get jitter, You're going to get peaks, and I deal with a lot of audio where I'll see, especially, this might be helpful, especially in the 18,000 and up range, I get a lot of audio that's got a line through there because some AD converter just freaked out. And even though that's beyond our ear, technically, even though we can't hear it, there's something funky going on up there. And what happens is there's math that happens before a peak, right? There's math before and after, leading math. And so if you've got something broken at a certain frequency, the math leading up to that has to make up for that mistake. And so it could be, even though it's in the 18K range, it could get down into the ear level that math is starting to act a little funky to make up for your AD converters not working very well. I hope that makes sense. If you look at any kind of, speaking of our sponsor, Isotope, if you bring up your audio in RX and you see a line up there at 18K or higher, and you think about some of the settings that you can do, this is a dead giveaway, do some of the settings for analyzing audio. It'll ask you, how much lead time do you want me to start reading? That lead time is math, right? So it's saying, well, how much of this math do you want me to consider the spike? If you say no lead time, it's going to go, okay, well, I'm showing you the spike, but I'm not showing you what else could be happening before, you know? And when you lower a spike, like you take the gain and you bring the spike down in RX, it doesn't bring just the spike down. It brings the spike down and the stuff next to it. Because all that math has to, you know, kind of live together, and it all has to add up, is my layman way of putting it. And so if you've got a bad AD converter or DA converter, and you get some weird lines like that, even though it's out of the frequency range, the point I'm trying to make is that it could be in the frequency range for some of the weird stuff that happens when it's trying to make up that math problem. Hope that's helpful.
Right, Matt Ullman and I are just sort of having a bit of a bass geek out in the chat room here. Sorry about this.
It's pretty great, just watching one part of my brain and listening on the other part of the brain.
One thing that, when Vince was here, one thing I was sort of lamenting. Vince and I went into one of the synth shops when we had a bit of time to kill before meeting Matsumai-san. And Vince wanted to try the new Roland V piano. And, you know, typical Vince, he sits down at the piano, I think, oh no, here we go. And he breaks into like the Rachmaninoff or the Liszt or the Mendelssohn or whatever it was, I don't know. But it was pretty damn incredible. And every people in the shop sort of looking over, like, who's that guy playing? Wow, that's really good. And I think, yeah, Vince, you show off. And I'm sort of thinking to myself that it's it really set inside me that agony of not being a keyboard player and being in music production. Because I just love watching Vince play there, and I'm thinking, gee, if I could play like that, you know, it makes it look so easy. And I think, wow, imagine all the cool stuff that I could do. I could actually record myself playing instead of having to punch in with the QWERTY keys on the tracker, which is the reason I use trackers, because I can't play keyboards very well. And I was thinking that, so I started asking Vince about, you know, bass, MIDI bass, or you know, using the bass guitar as some kind of input device for music production. It really, you know, it's really, as a large instrument, it's cumbersome. So from what I've heard, the MIDI interfaces for bass guitars, just because the bass deals in such low frequencies, it becomes much harder for the interface to, you know, really pick up the finer nuances of your playing, unlike a guitar, which sort of then means that, you know, that the practicality of having a bass guitar around as an input device is very limited compared to just having a keyboard that you can just, you know, punch away at with your fingers. Anyway, sorry, Matt Ullman and I will save our bass geeking up for another time, another place. Let's talk about reverbs. Reverbs.
Go.
So I bring this up just because if you follow my Twitter, you may have seen that this morning I was doing a little bit of a rapid fire tweet thing about a new reverb out in the last day, I think, from Valhalla DSP. Valhalla DSP is a one-man shop done by a guy in America called Sean Costello. And Sean is well known for his algorithmic reverb work. Previously, he did one called EOS for the Audio Damage Company, which is really, really nice. But the man is obsessed with reverb. And it's really, really fantastic to see somebody so obsessed with something that his entire product range is basically reverbs. And, you know, What I just thought I might do is just give you a little bit of a rundown of the different reverbs he has, because they're very affordable. They're all $50, and they are arguably they are extremely good. And you know, if you head into some of these online plugin forums and stuff like that, you will always find people mentioning how incredible his reverbs are. So I just thought I'd give you a quick rundown of the options very quickly, and then I want to hear from you guys what reverbs you use. So actually, I won't bother doing a screen share. You can listen to me instead. So basically, if you go to his webpage, which is valhalladsp.com, screw it, I'll do the screen share. Here we go. There we go. Screen share. That one. Start screen share. Okay. All right. So here we are on his website, which is valhalladsp.com. Now, if you're looking to buy some of his products, note that they are all $50. Wow, that's cheap. Yes, it is cheap. Let me just quickly go over the 4 options that I have that I can talk about. This one here that you see here in the top left-hand corner is the Valhalla plate. Actually, this is not a good example of a picture. The Valhalla plate is this new one. So basically, we have a plate reverb here, which looks like this. All of his interfaces kind of look very, very stripped down. They're sort of minimal. Looks like this. And we have vintage verb, which looks like this. So they all kind of basically look the same. And we have, actually, I won't bother showing all of them because they do actually look the same. So basically, Valhalla Room is an algorithmic reverb that specializes in reflections. The one thing that this was his first sort of really hardcore heavy-duty reverb plugin, and the controls on it are fairly complicated. You do sort of need to know what you're doing. You can see when you look through here, you've got like, you know, crossover, late size, bass multiply, bass crossover, high multiply, high. You know, even the terminology is a little bit more technical. You've got separate control over the early reflections and the late reflections. This section down the bottom changes depending on what your mouse is over. So there's kind of like live documentation there, but it is fairly complicated. The sound of this is basically all about reflections. So very complicated, very lush, dense reflections, hence Valhalla Room. If you are, so Valhalla Room is great for simulating real spaces. This is UberMod, which is actually modulation, so it's a delay and a chorus plugin. However, it does really, really lush, artificial long-tail reverbs, because it has, you can see here, diff, which is diffusion, has independent control over the diffusion of the signal, of the delay taps, and so you can actually produce artificial reverb tails. Very, very artificial, but extremely long and extremely dense and thick and lush. So this is the place to go if you're into something that sounds a bit more artificial.
Yeah.
Then we have, this one is arguably his most popular, which is Vintage Verb. Vintage Verb specializes in emulating the old lexicon reverbs from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So it's really dirty. All the artifacts are there. It's grit, dirt, very kind of vintage sound. This is the place to go if you're looking to get a specific kind of legacy tone. You know, you want that 80s style slapback on your snare, or like your vocal, or you want that sort of big gated reverb sound, or whatever. You know, this is the place to go for the legacy tones. And as of a few days ago, and as of this morning, I just bought blind without demoing because hey, this is Valhalla Plate, which is his new plate reverb, and this is obviously a plate reverb. So everything that you would love about the plate reverb, and where you would use a plate reverb as opposed to anything else, like a lexicon or some kind of room simulation or whatever, then this is great. Actually, I found it to be really, really nice, very lush. It sounds just like a plate reverb, like a very, very good plate reverb, but as you can see, his interfaces are getting gradually more and more simple because a lot of people are sort of complaining that they're too technical. So this one is even more simple now. This is all you see here are all the controls that you have, and a lot of great presets. So it's really good if you want to, if you sort of, there we go. If you're not sure about how to use it, you can just basically go to a preset. So my recommendation for reverbs would be any one of these 4, depending on your usage. Now, you guys. Kyle, what do you do for reverb?
Uh-oh. I do hardware reverbs pretty heavily.
Oh, wow.
So, Vince, you should talk reverb first, and I'll get links together.
Wow, okay. I mean, I like hardware reverbs. I mean, when I was first starting out in the whole audio production thing, the group of guys that I hung out with were really big on Lexicon. And I was like, oh, yeah, this Lexicon stuff is great. And then Altiverb hit in the 2000s. It was like, okay, I just got my dedicated Altiverb Mac. And then all this other stuff. And I guess after a while, I sort of decided the really important thing for me personally is just having something that's nice and simple and fast and easy to manipulate while being above that quality threshold. So for me, the thing that I like using is the overloud stuff. So Reverb and Rematrix. So Reverb is their algorithmic reverb, and Rematrix is their convolution reverb. And the things and they're both very similar in the way that they control, which is quick and simple. It's very fast to use those things and dial in the right sound or very close to the right sound within seconds of loading anything. Usually I'll just load up a preset and be like, oh, I know exactly what I want to do with the room size, the length, all that stuff. So I can just get 95% of the way there super fast. And I just like the interface that they provide for me to afford that sort of quick work. So I've really been leaning on those reverbs pretty heavily over the last few years.
So as far as software reverbs go, I think the one I lean on the most is East-West, what's it called, Spaces?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I use that one a lot. But I bought a Bricasti Model 7, and that thing is ridiculously expensive, so you have to use the shit out of it to get your money back, right? But so as a guitarist, I have so many reverbs, it's ridiculous. I mean, reverb has been in my life since I was 8 years old, but it's always in a pedal format. So I always wanted that massive Eventide, or Eventide, whatever, I say Eventide, reverb, like the 20, is it the 2900 that super famous? I can't think of it right now. I'm going to share a screen because I did something I think people might be interested in, and that was that being a guitarist, and you could do this without being a guitarist, I picked up a couple of these Eventide Footpedals where they took a bunch of the presets and put them in a foot pedal form from all of their Eventide gear. And here it is. And let me know if you're seeing that okay.
Yep.
So what I did is I picked up a Moog rack for their VX 351, which I have, and it happened to fit the size of the Eventide pedals perfectly, and there's actually screw holes that fit. You take the back of the Eventide pedal off and you put it on the thing and you can screw the screws in, so they sit nice and snug right in the rack. And I love these things. So a lot of people really like that Eventide sound. I happen to be one of them, and I've got a delay, which is the TimeFactor, and I've got Space, which is their reverb. And even though I got the Bricasti, don't tell my wife, I'm using these more than that darn Bricasti. And I probably should not be doing that, since I talked her into the Bricasti, and she's an accountant, and it was barely, it almost came with divorce paperwork. But I got past it, and here we are with my now new, my Eventide's racked. So I'm having a blast with this. That is the hardware solution I use the most, is those two. I'll take this down now. I imagine everybody's seen it. But if you get that rack, that Moog X351 rack, you can just load those guys right up on your system. And what's really cool about these is they have, why is it so dim? I look so in the dark. They have line level as well as guitar level. So you can, you know, they meant for these to be used in a professional studio, and you can just switch these metal switches on the back, and you're all good to go. So the software I use the most is Spaces. The hardware I use the most are these Eventides, and I use the Bricasti a lot.
Cool.
Yeah. So
Lots of guys talking about reverb in the chat as well. Some cheap stuff like that Alesis Quadriverb.
Oh man, I've got one of those.
I think I've touched one. No, wait a minute. I've actually owned one before, and then I got rid of it.
You know, there's also, if you want, I'm looking over here, Lexicon Alex, which I got from Mr. Mike Shapiro, actually.
Lexicon made a product called Alex.
They did, Alex.
Are you serious?
Are you seeing how dark I am in here? It's weird after that screen share. I'm like totally in the dark.
I've never heard of the Lexicon Alex.
I am going
I
to
would
find
know about that.
You know, the thing about the Lexicon Alex is it's basically just a machine of presets. You just turn the dial to a preset they created, turn the dial to another preset, another preset. So you don't have a. That's not fair. You can go in deep and get and start to affect those presets, but the screen is like the size of a postage stamp, and I hate that when I'm trying to make edits to something and it's just this tiny little screen.
Well, a machine full of presets, I think they gave it the wrong name because that's not me at all.
That's true, right? I see what you did there.
Oh, man.
Yeah, well.
Yeah.
Great. I think one other thing I wanted to... Are we... Reverbs. Anyway, Reverbs, great. Let's before we run out of time for topics today, I wanted to just jump over to Vince. We'll just have a little bit of a debrief about Vince's visit to Japan because it was great fun. So tell us what you thought, Vince.
Oh man, wow, what to think about Japan? Well, this was a different area of Japan. Well, for me at least, I'd met Alex briefly last year, but that was during a 6-hour stay in Osaka. And most of the rest of the time I was in other parts of Japan, especially Tokyo. But this time in Japan, I was in Osaka and the greater Kansai area for a good solid week. And I had a somewhat different feeling about stuff from there. Everything sort of felt a little bit different. Everything sounded different. The people sounded different. The city just felt different from Tokyo, even though it is also a similarly extremely large city with a lot of people in it. I guess well, let's first of all, I've got to say that Osaka definitely has a leg up on Akihabara with its own version of it, Denden Town, their own electric town. I wasn't able to find many of the synths that I was hoping to go for. I was telling Alex I was really looking forward to finally reacquiring a Yamaha VL. Not that I ever acquired a VL before, but I loved playing with it when I was in college and other people introduced me to it. Now that I've got an Iwi, I'm like, okay, I've got to get one now to drive a VL with my Iwi for fun hardware physical modeling. Couldn't find that, but I was able to find all these other little shops that I really couldn't find in Akihabara, things that were very much for electronics and electric and audio. There was this really cool repair shop for 50s, 60s, 70s vintage Sony microphones. And so Sony made their first condenser mics back in the late 50s, early 60s. Well after the Germans sort of figured that thing out decades before. But the Sony microphones are really quite cool, and I found this little shop in this alley that had refurbishes and recreations for the Sony C37, the Sony C38, the C450, the C48, all those really cool things. And that was so exciting. I couldn't find anything like that in a week of trawling through Akihabara, which has become much more of a mainstream otaku game anime sort of fest in that street. And in Denden Town in Osaka, I was able to find a whole lot more of this stuff. Wow, tape decks and microphones and all this outboard gear, some from companies I was familiar with, some from companies I was not familiar with. So that was really, really fun for me as a music and audio guy.
Yeah, that's actually in Tokyo, that kind of stuff used to be in Akihabara, but because of the commercialization of that area, because of all the manga and anime and underage girls in French-made outfits and all that kind of stuff. All of that got shifted off to a different area of Tokyo called Ochanomizu. Ochanomizu's got a place called Gakigai, which is the music instrument area. So it's like a traditional area with a lot of, there's always been like makers of musical instruments. So a lot of the sort of sound and audio stuff got shifted north up there. So it's no longer in Akihabara. But in Osaka, they never had that kind of, being a trade capital, they never had an area specifically for musical instruments or anything. So it all just sort of remained in Denden Town and stayed there because Denden Town has sort of become very, like it's like in a little sort of a time loop with itself, just sort of not really changing very much, which is a good thing, if you're interested in that kind of stuff.
They should do the time warp again.
Wow.
Come on.
That was just bad. No, that was very bad, Kyle.
I don't think Alex is still getting it. Alex, did you see Rocky Horror Picture Show?
No, I didn't.
Oh. Oh my God. Vince, we should go to Alex's house and take a bunch of rice and toast and just indoctrinate him into this experience.
Oh man. Or when next time he comes over here, I mean, they've got the weekly midnight showings in West LA,
Okay, Alex, just Google Rocky Horror Picture Show. Give an experience.
Or don't. You don't have to. Seriously.
You have to. You must do this. This is mandatory.
So, Vince, you were saying something else about the lots of jingles and stuff everywhere, like from a musical point of view.
There's part of me. Let's see. There's some jingles that I hate. So there's a major store in Osaka, elsewhere through Japan, called SoftMap, and they have this incredibly silly, cute march that comes in both an instrumental and a vocal form. La 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 la. I hate that song. Absolutely hate it. They do not stop playing that song throughout the entire time. You go between the floors, first floor, second floor, all the way up to 7th floor, 8th floor, whatnot. They are playing that song nonstop.
Does the pitch go up as you go up floors?
That would be interesting.
Unless the escalator had format control, and then it would just be...
Just like link that escalator into an RTPC, and there you go, you're set. Just ramp it up.
They use these jingles everywhere, so there's the shops that use it. But I thought the most interesting one was actually with the subways. So in Tokyo, it's actually relatively easy to get to a whole lot of places via just the JR loop line, the Japan Railways loop line. There are other smaller subway companies that have control over other lines through Tokyo, but you don't really need to go through those. In Osaka, there is also a similar JR line, but that is far less useful than all the other subway lines that crisscross through the city. So the Chuo line, the Midosuji line, the Tanimachi line, all of those lines. And actually, all of those lines have their own dedicated jingles. And it was really cool to actually listen to them and sort of pick out where I am. And even though I should know, I got on the subway. Of course I'm on this line. But inevitably, to get anywhere really quickly, you have to go through 1 or 2 transfers in order to get to the right place into the city. And those musical cues on the subway train when you get off were useful for letting me know, oh, now is the time to transfer. And I thought that was actually really cool. And I was already starting to get it after a few days of just listening to these jingles. And I can imagine after a few weeks or a few months, I would really get used to it. And that would help me just as much as using Google Maps on my phone in terms of telling me when I need to transfer to do things.
That's pretty cool.
You can actually find reflections of it in the way that the Japanese composers work in their audio into the games, which we'll get onto in a moment when we talk about Matsumai-san. But it's all basically about protocol. It's like there is a system for doing this the right way, and so if you're a subway line, of course you need your own jingle. That's just the way that you do it. It's less about sort of doing things that are interesting, new, different. That it's more about protocol and doing things, quote, the right way, unquote. And so with the subway systems, yeah, there's always been that idea that every subway system lines and also the different train networks should have their own melodies that they play, at the station, also melodies that they play on the train when the doors are closing, because they all sound different. And it's really nice. Kids love it. Like my son loves it because of, these little catchy melody hooks that are all over the place. It's a very musical, as you said, Vince. It guides you musically, that's really that's very interesting. And I'd always assume, because I come from Australia and there's no trains, buses, we all just walk. But when I first came to Japan, I just assumed that was my first experience with that level of intense metropolitan public transport networks. So I just assumed that every other place is like that too. Then I went to San Francisco. Oh yeah, and the BART system, that voice synthesis technology. This is the same city that gives you, Siri and all of those, those really, really incredible voice synthesis. And you get on the BART, and it's what?
Well, see, Alex, we have a standard of subways here that we follow, no matter if you're in New York or San Francisco or getting some fast food from a fast food place, is that it needs to be incomprehensible so that you can try harder to order better food or get to a better location.
I see. So the case with this voice synthesis thing, it needs to be incomprehensible so that you don't recognize that it actually is.
Yeah.
Like I remember back on the Amiga, there was a program called Say on the Amiga, and you just type in what you want into the window, and then it will say it in that voice from like 1986 or whatever it was.
Yeah. Well, if you miss your stop, they get more money, right?
That's right.
So. Alex, I wanted to bring this up. You mentioned Australia. I've been watching a show called QI, and I would like to know, sir, if you know the answer to this question. What animal is responsible for more deaths in Australia than any other animal?
Animal, not insect or sea creature.
It is an animal.
That's a good question. Would it be the dingo?
Nope.
No? Not a reptile, is it?
Do you want to answer? Yeah, I would love more guesses if you've got more, but in the space of time, should I just expose it?
Yeah, tell us.
It is the horse.
The horse? We don't have horses in Australia.
The horse is responsible for more deaths in Australia than any other animal.
That's incredible. I thought if you had included other creatures, I would have actually said the jellyfish.
Oh yeah.
There's some seriously lethal.
I learned two things on QI about jellyfish. First of all, jellyfish are 40% of the bio weight. I can't think of the term right now of the ocean. They also, along with the moon, are the only other thing that affect the waves of the ocean. So 40% of the biomass of the ocean is jellyfish. And the other one is that man-o'-wars aren't even a jellyfish. It's a colony of other animals all collected together to create this thing.
Isn't it a metal band?
Man-o'-war.
It is.
Anyway, so Vince, let's before we finish, I wanted to ask about your impressions of Manami Matsumaya. So just to give you some context, everybody, we met her on the. Vince and I spent the whole day together, and we arranged to meet her in the evening. And we went to a Indonesian restaurant, which was very good. It was very nice. And I was basically the interpreter for Mr. Vincent Diamante, and from that game company, and the legendary Manami Matsumaya, who I'd previously met at Bit Summit this year. So, what were your impressions, Vince?
Well, I mean, it's so she's she's older than me. She's a middle-aged Japanese woman, rather soft-spoken, rather humble. I mean, when I think about her accomplishments, I think, all these great games that I played, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. So obviously games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but also arcade games for Capcom in the late 80s and early 90s, especially CPS-1 games. Magic Sword, UN Squadron, which is Area 88 over in Japan. I actually told her that Area 88 is one of my very, very favorite soundtracks, and she was really quite well, she was very happy to hear that, and she also related that that is um, not just another soundtrack for another Capcom game, that it was an interesting protocol for that, where she was allowed a significant amount of freedom with the composition for that game compared to other games that she did for Capcom. Just the relationship that she had with the producer was such that she can work very much on the feel of the game, write music for the visual feel and the mechanical feel of the game there, rather than hitting the mark that was established by the game's producer at the time. And thus, it was actually a very easy process for her to write the music for that. So that was kind of interesting. It made me want to question if that was in fact the case, because she also felt that that was some of the best music that she had written for Capcom as well. Why, how shall I say, why not just make it that way all the time in order to maximize the quality of music output? But I wasn't quite sure about what was the best, easiest way to say that for her. But we went through a number of different topics, talking about game audio back then. She was really quite humble about her skill with working with the hardware capabilities at the time. So Capcom's arcade boards were, of course, FM synth. The early NES was simple synth. And also talking about how audio is right now and what's not just what game developers and audio designers are capable of right now, but also what the technology is these days and what the workflow is like these days for a music composer or a sound designer. What is expected out of music composers and sound designers now compared to back in the late 80s. For Matsumae-san, she was very much a music composer, and we talked a little bit about things like implementation and interactivity and what is expected when it comes to the delivery of music. And she said that, well, she doesn't really do too much of that. She's still very much a pure music composer, even on these latest games like Mighty Number 9, which is going to come out early next year. And it's really interesting thinking to how I usually give advice to people who are aspiring to be music composers and sound designers, that so much of it is actually all about the extra stuff beyond the music composition and beyond sound design. The ability to work within Wise or Fmod or do coding. But, there's a certain amount that goes your way if you can say that you are the composer for Mega Man and have done such and such games from Capcom over, from 2 decades ago.
Wow. Yeah, she definitely paints a very interesting picture of the scene here, and she came across. Just for information, this was the first time that I'd actually sat down to properly talk with her as well, because we met at Bit Summit because she was at the next table, and I just went and introduced myself, and she came and played our game, and then just kept in touch with her, and then Vince was coming, so I thought I'd just, as an excuse for me to meet her again, I thought it'd be great if I could set Vince and her up. So she paints an interesting picture of the scene here. That it seems she comes across as a very what's the right word? Sort of like a kind of grafting in the trenches. It's like real, just sort of bang, bang, bang. Soundtrack. Music. Less sort of the I guess the philosophical side of what we do. Sort of like does it? It's just sort of a simple criteria. Make it fit the game, and nothing more complicated than that. It just has to fit. And so a lot of the interesting depth that many of us like to talk about game music and how it fits into the context of the history of game audio and audio in entertainment in general and audio production, all of this. She was less interested in that and more interested in just the idea of does it fit? A very simple equation, make it fit. And whereas in the West, it's becoming very commonplace now that people who are making the music will have some part if not the majority of the part of implementing it in the game using some of the, the great middleware tools that we have like Wise and Fmod. Matsumoto-san gave the impression to us that in Japan it's still a very orthodox procedure, that basically the composer is the composer. And, she said to us, it's a little bit sad, if I'm honest, I'll say, that it sort of ends there, her interaction with the game, but she said to us that, if you're lucky enough as a composer for a game in Japan, if you're lucky enough to get an audio programmer who is musically talented and musically sensitive, then you will get some of these, interesting kinds of reactive music scores and these more integrated musical approaches in the game, if you're lucky enough to have that. If you're not, then you're basically just going to get an audio programmer or a programmer assigned to implementing the music in the game, and then it's basically level 1 music, play, level 1 music, stop, score, tally, screen, music, play, score, tally, screen, music, stop, and like very sort of cut and dry, very orthodox approach to implementing music in the game. And I think Vince and I were saying as we sort of debriefed after the meeting with her that it's, if I'm completely frank, I felt that it was a little bit unfortunate that the West seems to be moving into this direction where musicians have more power to easily create more experimental kinds of approaches to implementing game audio, or audio in games. Whereas in Japan, it seems that that level is basically given to the audio programmer, and if you're lucky enough to get somebody who's interested in doing that kind of stuff, then you get it. Otherwise, you just get a very kind of orthodox approach to it. Mm-hmm. So, as a result, after her many years of experience, she is very sort of quaintly non-technical. She does a lot of she's asked to do a lot of performances, and actually the day after that Vince and I met her, she was on a plane to actually Indonesia to give a concert playing some of her classic tunes for people who are interested in game audio down there. And Vince was saying, Vince and I, of course, if you're going to have a dinner with Vince and I, and you say that you're going to be playing a keyboard in a concert, you're going to get asked what kind of keyboard is it, because it's Vince and me. So Vince and I was like, what kind of keyboard do you play? And she said, I don't know, I really don't know. Sorry, it's just like a keyboard. Wow. I just press this button, and then I get that sound, and then I press play on my Mac, and that's the backing track, and I just play to it. And it's like she's very sort of quaintly non-technical like that. And I think she sees herself as very much just a music composer. And the fact that her music is used in games means that her objective just becomes making her music fit the game, and that's it.
Does she compose on that keyboard? Does she do everything there? Does she use soft synths?
Yeah,
orchestras, I should say.
Vince and I tried to sort of ask a bit. We tried to talk a bit shop, but it was quite difficult. Like I knew that she used Cubase because I'd seen Cubase on the screen behind her in photographs of her in her studio, her home studio. So I knew that was Cubase. But Vince was saying, yeah, I used to use Cubase back when it was this and that and this, and she sort of seemed a bit lost. Just like, well, I really don't know. I just there it is, and I just press record, and So it was nice because it really reflected, I guess, the roots of game audio in a sense that and she, as Vince said, she was just far too modest. She said, I don't know anything about programming synthesizers. I know nothing about that. And that's my husband, because her husband is actually a composer.
Yeah, she'd done plenty of FM synth sound design as well as music composition. So
yeah, it was weird. Yeah, it was weird because she was talking, I don't know anything about program synthesizers. But, back when we were doing something on the, what machine was it? She was talking about how they have to create all the FM sounds with numbers, and then you're inputting things into because we started talking a bit about tracker interfaces, and then she was saying, yeah, that's just like what we had to do back in Capcom with this and that. It's like, wow, you can do that. I mean, programming an FM synth with numbers is no easy feat.
Wow.
But yeah, she was just very modest, but very sort of traditional, and I think it was really nice to to see that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting thinking about the amount of power that music composers and sound designers wield in different places, and actually contrasting it with the amount of respect that is given to those people. Like I feel like there's sort of an inverse relationship there. In in Japanese game development, and this didn't come up with when I was talking to Matsumae-san, but when I was talking to a couple of other Japanese composers, it's sometimes the case that music will actually be composed well before mechanics are done, well before level designs are done. And actually, oh, okay, we got this stage music, we'll put it in here. We got this stage music, we'll put it in there. They actually have a lot of respect for the music that is made for their game, but they conversely don't really give them a lot of power in the actual game-making process. And over here, we actually have a lot of power now, especially as we have become really more than just acquainted with. We know how to really wield Fmod and Wise.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still this feeling that there's less respect actually given to us by others elsewhere in the game development process.
Matt Ullman raises a really good point in the chat room as well. Matt Ullman, of course, for those who don't know, also has a long career, but he said that there is something to be said for letting composers compose and coders code. So I guess it's important. It's easy for us to misunderstand that, oh, Japan is behind. They're behind. I mean, yes, in a certain, if you frame it a certain way, perhaps they aren't, or they're going sort of in a different direction. They're not progressing the way that they are in the West, and that we have all these great middleware tools, and a lot of this implementation is done by us now, as opposed to the programs behind the scenes. But yeah, there are certain benefits as well, as Matt said, to having that dichotomy where this guy makes the music, or this person makes the music, and this person does the implementation or the program.
I can relate. I mean, you know, I wanted to be a composer for film, and game is how I kind of where I ended up. And so here I am wanting to compose for games and figuring out that if I want to get hired in-house and have that kind of security, that I better learn how to do sound design, because at the time there weren't anybody, that's an over-exaggeration, there weren't many studios, at least none that were going to accept some newbie like me, to come in and give me health insurance and a regular paycheck as a composer. So I was like, okay, I got to figure out how to sound design, right? And so my career before I came into game audio was as a programmer. And so then I get in as a sound designer, and I realize that, and I'm not in-house, I'm independent, so I'm kind of like parlaying sound design gigs into composition. And then I realized that if I can add implementation to this, which I learned from Ian, because all the soundtracks that he was working on, he had that Nintendo DS box, this big blue box that he would just plug his DS into and implement everything, and so he became more valuable that way. So I'm going, okay, I want to be a composer, but to be hired, I got to learn sound design to get that longevity and to become more valuable. I got to fall back on my programming to do the implementation, you know. And then Wise, of course, and Fmod become a massive part of my life as well. Because I started really off in handheld, so that's why I'm saying by implementation. And then when I crossed over into other things, the implementation became Wise and Fmod. So, you know, all I ever wanted to do was just write music. That's what I wanted to do. So I'm very envious of I would butcher her name if I tried to say it, because there is a value to that, and that there's a relaxation too, right? She knows exactly what she has to do, where I will write something and I've got to also implement it, and I've got to handle the email chain, and I've got to do a presentation, and I've got to get some sound design going, and they need some voiceover, and I'm going to jump on that, because we kind of in the way that we keep our careers going, at least me, is almost saying no to, or saying yes to everything, you know, saying no to nothing. So because one thing leads to another, and that's just kind of the way it is, at least in my experience, I'm definitely envious of being able to say, we want you, Kyle, to write this music for this game. I go, oh my God, you don't want me to implement anything? That's fantastic. And I'd be able to concentrate more, you know, because that's the downgrade, is that we have so many things to do that we can't focus as much as we want to on some of them. What do you guys
I've got to duck out. I've got to head away, guys. So I'm going to leave you to close up the show. Thanks, everyone. It's been really good.
Wow.
Okay. See you next time.
Well, guess with that, we'll say goodbye, right, Vince?
Yeah, I guess so. Man, I wish I could have talked a little bit more about, well, not just a little bit more, but perhaps a little bit more eloquently about Japan. There's just so much that happens in a week there, and so many different minor things that happen that are so hard to actually relate. But I guess all I'll say is that if any of you guys have an opportunity to go to Japan and also hang out with other Japanese musicians and see the difference, I mean, it doesn't have to be video game musicians, but other musicians out there, other music performers, see other music studios out there in Japan, highly recommend it. It's a really cool place, and it's interesting to see how different the process can be.
That's awesome. Well said. Well, like us on those things and tweet us on those other things. And we are very, very excited to have iZotope as a sponsor. Oh my God, we got so into the show. I forgot to mention, please. Thank you, iZotope, for sponsoring the show. Please go out and check out their website, iZotope.com, iZotope.com. And we have another, I think, giveaway coming up pretty soon, don't we?
Yeah, I think we're going to introduce it next week, right?
Is that, if my calendar serves, I think that is quite right. So keep your eyes peeled for the next contest, and you're going to win some kind of software. We get to decide what it is. Should we make it coal since it's coming up on Christmas? Should we get them all excited and then hand them something? Nah, iZotope doesn't give away anything that's bad. So, or they don't make anything that's bad.
Yeah.
All right. I guess we'll have to do something nice.
We will be nice. It'll be fantastic.
Hey, thanks, Chatties, for being so awesome in the chat room. My God, it was active as heck. I almost said a cuss word. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye. Bye. Got to find my mouse so I can close down the show. There it goes.